When you turn on the news or read an article about abortion, inevitably you will hear reporters, pundits, and even experts state that the research on it is conclusive. They say women who don't receive abortions are emotionally harmed, and women who do get them report a better quality of life. But is that true? And why do their claims on abortion always seem to trend in one direction? Well, it's almost entirely thanks to this one study.
It was a huge chunk of research done on abortion, the Turnaway study.
And today I want to talk to you about the Turnaway study.
The Turnaway study found that women who were denied abortions were more likely to struggle to bond to their babies. Wait, what babies?
Chances are, if you've read or heard the claim that being denied an abortion is harmful to women, it's because of the Turnaway study. This research was led by the pro-abortion research group named Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, or ANSWER for short. A group that is never shy about their advocacy. They recently shared on Twitter that any limit or restriction placed on abortion is not science, but purely based in politics, and shared with the hashtag abortion without limits. Unsurprisingly, this group's Turnaway study concluded that women who were denied abortion had worse financial, familial, and health outcomes. In this episode, we're going to talk to researchers from pro-life organizations who offer counter-evidence to ANSWER's claims. And we'll hear about how the pressure to abort also affects the mental health outcomes of women. And in light of the recent Planned Parenthood minor abortion trafficking video that took place in Missouri.
She's 13. Her parents don't know yet.
Yeah, so we don't do them here. But we don't do them in Missouri. It's illegal. But we do have, I can give you a packet of the 2 locations that do it in Kansas. They have people that'll come pick them up. They have people that'll pay for the whole thing. Yes, I would call them and tell them what the situation is. They're going to help you with that.
All within Planned Parenthood?
We will also talk to a researcher and investigative reporter who can explain how culpable abortion centers are in forced sex-trafficked abortions.
I'm Tessa Cox. I'm a senior research associate with Charlotte Lozier Institute. I've been here for about 7 years now. I was really inspired by CLI's mission of putting out high-quality research on under-researched areas, and so I dove in, and I've been here ever since.
Tessa, would you say that this category of forced, coerced, or unwanted abortions is an under-researched or under-studied area?
Absolutely. I think it's something that a lot of people don't think about. And even I, who have been involved in this type of research for a while now, was really surprised to just see how prevalent this is and how often it's showing up in women's lives, women's experiences, and how it can be impacting them for years down the road. So it's something we don't talk about a lot. It's something that there's not a lot of research out there, and it's a big problem.
Yeah, that was one of the things that struck me the most when I read the research from you and Dr. Reardon and the team. I was very interested because as far as I can tell, it's pretty novel research. I mean, there aren't a lot of researchers curious or digging into this to see how frequent this coercion, this pressure, these unwanted abortions are in our country. So I'm excited to talk to you today about this. How did you all come to want to study this topic, and what was your team makeup like? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. Well, this was all the idea of the lead author, Dr. David Reardon, who has been studying abortion and the impact of abortion on women's mental and emotional health for decades. And so based on his previous research, he knew that there was a need for more research on women's experiences of abortion and how they felt about the decision to have an abortion looking back, and what they felt had kind of pushed them into making that decision. And so he designed a survey of a national sample of 1,000 women, over 200 of whom had abortions, which is very close to the national average, and gave women the opportunity to share some nuanced information about their decision to have an abortion, the different pressures that they had experienced, and how they felt all of that had worked together to impact their lives going forward, either positively or negatively. And so it brought together Dr. Reardon's depth of research and knowledge and experience on this topic. Also the work of one of our other scholars, Catherine Rafferty, who is experienced in health communication research, and then myself. And I've spent a lot of time digging into abortion complications and the impact of abortion in general. So it was a good team, and taking a novel approach to really dig into this understudied issue.
And what was the overarching study trying to understand from the onset and uncover?
We were trying to understand how women made their abortion decisions and how they felt about them. So the first study that we conducted based off of this survey looked at the different forms of pressure that women experienced in their decision to have an abortion. And this could be from finances, life circumstances, or other people in their lives. And we gave them the ability on sliding scales to rate how much pressure they remembered experiencing. And then we did another study looking at the actual abortion decision. Did women want to make that decision to have an abortion? Was it consistent with their preferences? And we gave the women the opportunity to provide nuanced, complex responses to this question, because there's research out there, there's existing research that says, oh, women say that the decision to have an abortion was the right decision for them given their circumstances. But we knew that overarching finding was covering up a lot of complexity. And so we wanted to dig into that and give our survey participants the opportunity to really report some of that complexity and get to the heart of how they actually felt about their decisions and whether having an abortion was what they wanted.
Tessa, when you say there's some existing research, are you referring particularly to the Turnaway study?
Yes, that's exactly right. So this was a study. The Turnaway study was done on women who had gone to abortion centers and then been turned away because they were past the limit of how late the abortion center would do the abortion. And the study has some significant limitations in that there was a high rate of women lost to follow-up, women who did not end up being included in the entirety of the study. And just the way it was set up, it was fairly selective in who all could even be included in the study. And so we did suspect that it was not going to be truly representative of all women who were getting abortions. But we wanted to dig into that finding that most women who get abortions say that it was the right decision for them, because we thought that there was a lot more going on under the surface. And so we took a look at this national sample of women who had had abortions, women who were at or near the end of their reproductive years, ages 41 to 45, and then asked them to reflect back so we could have their viewpoints on that decision and how they felt it fit into their lives.
When you talk about the limitations of the Turnaway study, could you just describe some of those? When did they interview the women? What was the sample size? Just some things to really illustrate what you're talking about.
One of the challenges of interpreting the Turnaway study findings is that it's really difficult to tell what the sample size was for any given study, because multiple studies have come out of this, multiple papers, and the number of women included can be slightly different for each one. But they interviewed women over a series of surveys, and women dropped out fairly rapidly from survey to survey. So the number of women who were included in the first round was much greater than the number of women who were included in the final survey round. But even more than that, we were concerned that the way that this study was set up would mean that the population of women, the sample of women that were included, would not necessarily be consistent with all women getting abortions across the United States. We know that women who are later in gestations are sometimes experiencing different circumstances than women who get abortions earlier in pregnancy. There are reasons that women were turned away from these abortion centers that could make them different from the average woman getting an abortion. And also, there was some inconsistencies in the ways in which the different abortion centers that were participating in the study recruited participants, and a lot of it was left up to the actual abortion center staff to recruit women. And so there was concern that that women who might not be doing as well, who might be having a worse reaction to the abortion or just having more complex feelings about it, might not be approached to participate in this study, might decline to participate, or might drop out fairly quickly. And that was actually something that we saw in our own study. As we were recruiting women, we used an online survey platform, and women were invited to participate. They were asked if they had ever had an abortion, and then they could see more about the detailed questions that we were going to ask as part of the survey. And women who said that they had a history of abortion were much more likely to drop out and not want to complete the rest of the survey. So there's evidence there that women who have had abortions, perhaps women who don't want to think back to their abortions, perhaps it was a difficult experience, a painful experience, are less likely to want to participate in these sorts of studies. So a lot of limitations with the Turnaway study, and a lot of reasons for taking some of the findings there with a grain of salt.
Well, wasn't one of the main criticisms of the Turnaway study also that they were surveying these women quite soon after they were turned away from the abortion center?
Yes, that is another limitation. One of the key papers that came out of this study surveyed women about a week after they had had the abortion or were turned away, and interestingly, the differences in emotional outcomes kind of converged the further along women were from that point of either getting the abortion or being turned away. Right afterward, the women who had been turned away, understandably, had some poor emotional outcomes. They were stressed. They were trying to figure things out. But as time went on, their emotional experience converged with the rest of the women in the sample. And in fact, strikingly, one of the things that one of the stats that came out of the Turnaway study was that the vast majority of women who were turned away, who did not have abortions and went on to give birth to their babies, ended up being very glad that they had their babies. So as they were looking back, they were glad that they had had the opportunity to have their babies. And it was a huge percentage, around 96%. So really a complex, complicated set of emotions that can't just be distilled into, one snapshot in time.
You never hear that when in regards to this kind of preeminent abortion study. So that's really interesting. So going back to, the Turnaway study is what pretty much most of the abortion industry, abortion researchers and Democrats point to when they're talking about any kind of abortion research. Really, it's like the number one study they always cite. So it's really interesting that you guys wanted to dig into that and see where the limitations were. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was that, since we're talking about it, one of the authors of the Turnaway study actually commented on your research, you and the team, and said that her criticism was that you guys surveyed women who were later on, in age, more past the abortion. So I thought that was fascinating to see that she was critiquing that side of it, saying that women who are older or at the later part of their reproductive age could not have accurate perspective on their abortion. Why do you think it's actually more important to ask women later in life versus right after the abortion or the turn away?
Yes, and that is interesting. We were interested to see that criticism because we actually did design the study specifically so that we were looking at women who had had their abortions years before. Like I said, we specifically selected women who are ages 41 to 45. And we did that because we wanted to get women's perspective on how the abortion had impacted their life. It's certainly worth doing. The research is incredibly valuable to see what women are experiencing regarding their abortions as they're having them, right after, how that's playing into their lives. But what we really wanted to capture in this study was how they felt about it, perhaps years, maybe even decades later, and reflecting back how they thought about that abortion decision years after the fact, and how they saw it playing into how the course their lives had taken since then. So we really wanted that long-term perspective, giving women the opportunity to look back and really consider the role that abortion had played in their journey. So that was one of the strengths of our study rather than a limitation.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be. So regarding the study and its findings, can you explain the different types of pressures? You had mentioned a sliding scale that you offered women. I mean, what were you finding, and what were the different pressures that were ticking from the women?
Yes, so we gave women the opportunity to report the levels of pressure that they remembered experiencing, different kinds of pressure, and they could select as many pressures as they remembered playing a role in their abortion decision. And, on a scale from 0 to 100, rank how high the level of pressure had been. And we found that over 60% of the women in our survey felt high levels of pressure from at least one source. And so that could be life circumstances, finances, other circumstances, but also interpersonal pressure. And we found that 19% felt high levels of family pressure, and 15% felt high levels of pressure from the male partner who was involved in the pregnancy. So a large number of women feeling high levels of pressure from the most important people in their lives to have an abortion, which was very striking and very concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you just, it's something you don't hear a lot of people talking about, even though I think many of us know that this happens. I actually talked to a pregnancy center director, and she said she sees it every week. And the primary sources of this pressure are the partner or the parent. So that really gels with the findings that you're sharing with me. What were some common themes that you kept hearing from the women or seeing from the women in this data?
Well, interestingly, we found that high levels of interpersonal pressure, so that pressure from other people in their lives, was had the strongest correlation with poor mental, emotional outcomes. And so the women who were reporting this high level of pressure from other people were also the most likely to report how their abortions had impacted them negatively. So these were negative emotions, interference with daily life, frequent thoughts and flashbacks, feelings of grief, all of these things. And remember, these are women who are very likely years past their abortions, looking back and seeing how abortion has taken such a negative toll on their lives. And the fact that it was this pressure from other people that was most strongly correlated with these poor outcomes was really, it fit with what we had heard from people who have worked with women who have had abortions, pregnancy centers who have been serving them, but seeing it there in the numbers, which is so starkly, was very surprising and saddening.
Yeah, I can imagine. You mentioned the numbers. What was the numerical breakdown? I know that there was a 2/3 finding of women in this survey. Can you just walk us through some of the different numerical breakdowns?
Okay, yes. So Over 60% felt high levels of pressure from at least one source, 41% from other circumstances, almost 30% from finances, and then 19% from family members, 15% from the male partner, and 11% felt high levels of pressure from people in their lives, other people besides the family member and partner. After we did this study looking at pressures to abort, we decided to do a second study, a follow-up based on the same survey, the same data, digging into a very closely related but slightly different question about women's abortion decision-making. And so this was designed to even more closely adhere to the Turnaway study and provide more context around that Turnaway study finding that most of women say that abortion was the right choice for them. And so a lot of the women in our study said that, yes, abortion was the best decision they could make given their circumstances. But when we really dug into how they felt about that choice, we found that most women did not want their abortions. Only a third said that their abortions were wanted and consistent with their values and preferences. And 2/3 said that they were inconsistent with or counter to their values and preferences. And that includes almost a quarter who said that their abortions were unwanted or coerced. So a huge percentage of women who did not want their abortions said that they were not what they wanted, not consistent with their values. And again, the women who didn't want their abortions, the women who had experienced these unwanted abortions, attributed the most negative mental and emotional outcomes to the abortion. They experienced more moral and maternal conflict. And then one of the most striking findings from this study was that 60% of the women said that they would have preferred to give birth if they had received more emotional support or financial security. So if there had been that help there for them, if there had been anyone in their lives saying, you can do it, I'll be there for you, I'll help you, we'll figure it out, they would have wanted to have their babies. So abortion was not something that they wanted. Abortion was something that they felt like was their only choice.
So what we're seeing here is really kind of a return to what Democrats used to say. It sounds like they used to understand this landscape, which is abortions are tragic, unwanted, and that seems to be the majority of what's happening right now versus their messaging today, which says abortions are freedom.
We hear so often that abortions are freedom, abortions are empowering, but looking at the women who participated in this survey, so many of them felt like they had no other choice. They felt pressured into it. They felt sometimes coerced into it. And they felt that their abortions had harmed them and were still having a negative impact on their lives even years later. So the opposite of empowerment.
Yeah, exactly. Tessa, why do you think, if this is so prevalent, why do you think so many people don't recognize that it's happening on the ground? I think it was really striking that you guys called this a hidden epidemic. Why is that?
I think a lot of these women feel silenced. A lot of them are hurting. They want to put the experience behind them, and they feel like there's no one that they can talk to. In other research that we've done, specifically looking at abortion drugs, we looked at the themes that kept coming up in women's accounts of their experiences with abortion drugs. And so often women talked about feeling alone, feeling silenced, like there was no one for them to talk to. The rest of the world was moving on, but they couldn't. And there was no one that they could really share their grief, share their experiences with. And so I think we see some of those same themes borne out in this research as well, with women feeling like there's no one that they can share this burden with in many cases. And like you said, a lot of the cultural narrative around abortion is that abortion is good, abortion is empowering. And so when a woman has an abortion and that's not her experience, it can feel very isolating to have had an experience that's so far opposed to what the abortion industry would have you believe abortion is. And so I think a lot of women feel alone in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just culturally speaking, it's really difficult. This is such a lightning rod topic, and it's very difficult for people to share this, particularly their personal experiences, if they're negative, because they run counter to what every institution in our country says it should be, which, media, Hollywood, everyone's saying that abortion needs to be an empowering thing. And when a woman has a counter experience to that, which according to your research, most of them do have a counter experience to that, I can only imagine how silencing that must be when you don't feel like you can confide in anyone, particularly if by your findings, that person who pressured you into that abortion is one of your closest family members or partner or whatnot.
Absolutely. And I think it really does point to how critical the work of pregnancy centers is, both before and after that abortion decision. And that, for me, is one of the key takeaways of all of this research, because you see that 60% of women who indicate that they would have rather have had their babies if they had just received more support, if there had been someone in their corner, if there had been someone there to offer resources and financial support. And that's what pregnancy centers are there to do, to be there, to be that helping hand when no one else is there, when everyone else in a woman's life is trying to pressure her into having an abortion. And then afterward, there are so many women who need healing, who need someone to walk with them through processing the experience, who need forgiveness. And again, pregnancy centers are there to be the listening ear when a woman feels like she has no one else to talk to. So really just pointing to how critical, how important pregnancy centers are and what a difference they can make in women's lives.
Yeah. Well, speaking of silencing, I did see it reported that there were abortion groups and abortion researchers that are actively trying to cancel and suppress this research on forced, coerced, and unwanted abortions and this data. In fact, they strongly urged the journal that you guys are published in to discredit your work, trying to put a pressure campaign on them. Why do you think they're going after you guys and this study and this data so vehemently?
Well, we've received a lot of pushback on our research across the board. And I think a lot of it comes down to we are looking at things, we're digging into things that the abortion industry would prefer that everyone consider settled. Looking at the negative outcomes of abortion, looking at the complications of abortion. And I think that so many of these studies that we've published have shed light on areas that so many people would rather be kept in the dark. But it's important, and it makes a difference to so many real lives. Looking at these women's experiences, and if we can help shed a light and give women the information that they need, then it's worth doing it.
Well, Tessa, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing about your research.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I am Carol Novielli. I am the Research Fellow at Live Action, and I'm also a writer and contributor for Live Action News.
And Carol, how long have you been with Live Action, and why did you start? What was the draw?
So Live Action onboarded me in 2016, and so that's about, 8 years. And so I located to Florida, and that is when I really became interested in the research side of things. And so we had a number of abortion facilities there that were, doing some pretty horrific things. And I was doing a lot of documentation on the abortion industry with regard to rape and abuse inside of the abortion industry. In other words, abortion providers that were sexually abusing women, which is a whole other story, and began to write about that. And I was also looking at medical board documents across the country and seeing a lot of the complaints that were being filed, which, for women to actually get to that place of filing a complaint, especially back in those days, it was pretty egregious stuff. And I started to just see a lot of these patterns developing within the abortion movement. And so I had the opportunity to relocate to Texas, and in that time did a lot of research on Planned Parenthood, on their eugenic background, on the covering of child sex abuse, and all of these other types of topics, along with the abortion industry in general. And so from there it came fast forward to 2016 when I was able to take a position with Live Action.
And Carol, many people know Live Action, but for those who may not remember or don't know, can you describe some of the early investigative work of particularly Lila Rose?
Yeah, so Lila Rose is our founder, and she pretty much started the organization in 2003. Lila was, she literally went into multiple Planned Parenthood and abortion facilities with video, where she literally went in and got recordings of Planned Parenthood staff coaching her as a 13-year-old, posing in many cases as someone who had a boyfriend who was 31 years old. Like, there's no gray area with regard to that. And they're basically saying, we don't want to know the age. That's rape, that's abuse, that would have to be reported. And they were literally coaching her, how to skirt parental consent laws, how to do judicial bypasses, how to not say the age of the quote unquote boyfriend as an investigator, unknowing that she was an undercover person. They literally thought she was a 13-year-old child, and they're giving her this. And so this is another instance where information has come forward and it just confirms what's already been out there, which says that Planned Parenthood is systemically covering for child sex abuse. And so that's one of the many undercover investigations. There was another one in 2011 where Live Action sent in undercover investigators posing as being in the sex worker business. So basically they were pimps, and they were asking and inquiring about all kinds of care at Planned Parenthood. And they did mention that they had some younger girls working for them, and I believe the age of 14 was brought up. And again, these workers, if you watch the undercover investigations on our website, you can go to our website, liveaction.org, and then look under investigations, look under aiding abusers. You can see clips from all of these investigations. And what really sort of stunned me was just the overly gleeful way that these workers were like, yeah, we can help you. Yeah, no problem. We've got this, we've got that service. You can have them come in. We're not going to really check IDs. And one particular worker was like, well, let's just see, like 15 and up, not so much of a problem. 14, we might have some issues. And it's just sad to think that this was, a man and a woman coming in basically saying that they were in charge of these women that they were putting out into sex work, who weren't really women making up their own minds. These were, in many cases, minors that they were talking about openly, and still Planned Parenthood was very gleeful. In fact, one of the facilities out in New Jersey, it just, when it hit the news, it was pretty outrageous. And some of the statements that she made, she literally was like, look, you got 14-year-olds, she's circling on a piece of paper, just like, you can take them here, you can take them here, you can take them here. And it's just so outrageous that there was no advocacy on behalf of those children. It was all, let's do what we can to bring in this business. It was all dollar signs, it appeared to be. And so there's just been a number of those types of investigations that have been done by Live Action and have been put out there, and that confirm what we found with regard to actual cases and other types of, talking to previous former Planned Parenthood workers and other forms of information through studies. And so these aren't just one, segregated investigation from some anti-abortion group, but it's confirming what's out there in actual real cases. And still we find that Planned Parenthood is currently receiving, upwards of $700 million a year in just tax funding. And multiple states are just sending them money. And it's just sickening, because no matter what program you look at the federal level, and multiple state agencies all would require the reporting of child sex abuse, mandatory reporters as they are. and this is time and again, it's been exposed that they're not doing this. I'm not saying that they never do it, but the numbers of cases we were able to find where there was egregious incidences of 12-year-olds, 13, 14, this is no gray area. And yet these cases don't appear to have been reported. And these girls went on to be abused for upwards of, years, some of them 7 years later. It's just stomach churning, and it's heartbreaking, and it makes you angry to think that this continues to happen. And what are they rewarded with? More millions and billions of dollars over the course of their history. Just wash, rinse, repeat, do the exact same thing with no accountability. What we find time and again is that people who have done studies with, say, sex trafficking victims, they'll tell you in these studies that they were taken to Planned Parenthood because of their, quote, don't ask, don't tell policies, because they were easy to deal with or they didn't charge any money. So Planned Parenthood's website literally states, and I'm going to quote it, it says, if one of your teachers, a family member, your boss at work, or anyone much older than you does anything sexual with you, that's sexual abuse, even if you agree with it, okay? Now, you would assume this is directed maybe more at adults, but it is clear that that would involve children as well. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? And then Planned Parenthood's own glossary of terms, which is on their website, it describes statutory rape as, quote, illegally, sexual contact between an adult and anyone who is below the age of consent, whether or not the contact is voluntary. So they know the red flags. I mean, we've reported on this at Live Action News. In fact, Planned Parenthood says, they wrote this in 2013, that teenage girls with older partners are more likely to become pregnant than those with partners closer in age. Likewise, teenage boys with older partners are more likely to father a child. Where do children go when they're found to be pregnant? They go to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood also says a study found that 6.7% of women aged 15 to 17 have partners 6 or more years older than they are. Okay, that right there gives you, that's a relatively small percentage from other studies. But right there, they know that a pretty large, almost 7% of teenagers that are coming to them have partners 6 or more years. That puts you over into the age of an adult, right? And so what happens, whether you're not you're consenting, you have much younger children who are engaging in sex, and statistics show that younger children engaging in sex usually always is indicative of having an older partner, usually an adult, who is, encouraging this behavior. Even the Guttmacher, which is a former research arm of Planned Parenthood, on their website claimed, on average, young people in the United States have sex for the first time at the age of 17, right? On average. Yet Planned Parenthood's seeing 12, 13, 14-year-olds and turning a blind eye.
Yeah, and Carol, throughout this series, we're going to be just talking to a variety of people on the topic of forced, coerced, pressured, unwanted abortions. But really the stuff that you're describing is more firmly in the forced category, or the imbalance of power between a minor and an adult. I mean, just truly, truly awful stuff. In your extensive investigative reporting and research, what are some common themes that you've heard from former Planned Parenthood workers, or even uncovered and unearthed about, Planned Parenthood itself and current workers, when they shared about the culture of abuse reporting? What is that like, that culture there on the abuse reporting?
So we found, and we did talk to a number of former Planned Parenthood workers who repeatedly said that Planned Parenthood had basically a don't ask, don't tell, or they were highly discouraged from reporting, that even their coworkers were like, hey, this will get you into, you can report it, but, there's going to be problems. We find that Planned Parenthood, itself, in our investigation, repeatedly coached the girls to lie about the age of their boyfriends. They were like, I didn't hear you just say that. Then they, of course, when we exposed it, they would deny the accusation and claim that they would retrain staffers. Yet, a former Planned Parenthood employee by the name of Ramona Trevino told us in an interview that she was working at Planned Parenthood when we released one of our investigations, and they were telling the media, oh yeah, well that was kind of like an anomaly. And then they said that she was working for Planned Parenthood at the time, that they were claiming that they were just going to retrain staffers. Sorry, they should know better, this kind of attitude. And what she found was, when she attended one of these trainings, was that there was no like actual retraining. The training itself was how to identify and spot undercover investigators, such as those coming from live action, to know whether they're being recorded or doing a gotcha on them. And so where was the retraining? But they were telling the media there was all this retraining. And the former staffers also told live action that they witnessed, quote, girls coming in with their abusers against all protocol. So yes, on paper, there is protocol, right? They have to have that. But it said against all protocol, the abuser would be left in the counseling room with these women. They would describe women that were, some of them didn't speak good English. Others were just like their boyfriends, or they were claiming to be boyfriends, were very controlling, very much like taking control of the conversation, answering questions on behalf of the woman who was looking down, looking serene. And some of the Planned Parenthood, former Planned Parenthood workers were very uncomfortable with this. And but when they were inquiring about it with their managers, one of the former staffers told us that her manager told her, quote, she's better off with the abortion. We can't do anything about what's going on at home. Now, if you listen to what's put out there by Planned Parenthood, there's all kinds of things that they claim to stand for. And yet when they have a woman, you know, in their facility, according to these former staffers, who is, you know, fitting that bill of being controlled, they're just like, get the abortion at all costs, because that's what's going to make her better. That's what is going to better her life. It's very sad. It's a very low bar, and it's not even true. And then another staffer told us, if we saw a case of questionable abuse, or even for sure, I mean, this kid is being abused, we really were discouraged from calling it in. And so this is coming from their own staff, their former staff. We're told, trust women. Yet when these women come up and give their stories, the media is like, nope, not going to believe that.
Also, the women who were affected, I've read testimonials from minors who were raped or forced into abortions by their abuser and then aided by Planned Parenthood. Do you mind sharing one or two of those stories or lawsuits against Planned Parenthood where the survivor prevailed in that situation?
In one of the cases, and I'm only going to use her first name, involved a young girl by the name of Denise. She was literally raped by her father at the age of 13. She then becomes pregnant at the age of 16, and her father, he took her to Planned Parenthood for an abortion. Now, once there, according to her attorney, Brian Hurley, who we also interviewed, and all of this can be found on our aiding abusers investigative reports. But Brian Hurley, her attorney, was like, hey, while in the counseling room, they're like, you know, young lady, you should be on birth control if you're going to be having sex, blah, 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 blah. And she got a little bit incensed by that, because she's like, listen, she literally stood up for herself and told the Planned Parenthood counselor, I am not voluntarily having sex. I am being raped by my father, who is literally out in your waiting room, right? What did Planned Parenthood do in that case? Nothing. They didn't call the police. They didn't assure her they would protect her. They literally did the abortion on her. And then, according to the lawsuit, they turned her back over to her abuser, where she suffered at his hands for another year and a half. So according to the lawsuit, it was not Planned Parenthood that called in. The lawsuit literally talks about Planned Parenthood's, quote, don't ask, don't tell policies, practices. It was, it ended up being her basketball coach when she started to talk to the coach about the abuse that literally called law enforcement. And in that, what was interesting about the lawsuit, other than the horrific details of her, what she endured even after she left Planned Parenthood facility, was some of the stats that they cited. In the lawsuit, it said that Planned Parenthood, this is the claim from the lawsuit, Planned Parenthood knew every time a pregnant minor who had been infected by a sexually transmitted infection arrived at its clinic, more probable than not that the minor was a victim of sexual abuse. That knowledge was in part based on following information Planned Parenthood had in its own training files. So it's not just the pregnancy that the girls are being brought in for. They're brought in for other types of care, STIs. In one report we read, they were brought in for birth control. And yet Planned Parenthood, according to this lawsuit, their own training materials know these stats. And so there's so many egregious. I know one of the ones that I was really sort of broken up by was a case where this predator by the name of George Savannah was repeatedly raping his daughter. He impregnated her 3 times at the age of 14, 16, and 17, and each time brought her to Planned Parenthood to cover up his crimes. And the reports Planned Parenthood used in court confirmed that Savannah took the teen to Planned Parenthood for abortions. No one else knew the victim's pregnancies except who? Planned Parenthood and the abuser. The court document stated that the sexual assaults only became public once the victim, not Planned Parenthood, spoke to her aunt about the abuse. And this was 7 years after the victim was taken for her first abortion at Planned Parenthood. So imagine you can't stop maybe the first assault, but you left that girl 7 years. And this, I believe, was multiple Planned Parenthoods. And this isn't just like, oh, he said, she said, some teenager is trying to get out of trouble making this claim, false accusation type stuff. No, Savannah was convicted on 2 counts of third-degree rape of a child, 2 counts of first-degree incest, sexually abusing his daughter, impregnating her for 3 times, and sentenced to 120 months for all counts, plus 18 months of community custody. And the information that we found came out in his appeal. That's where it became public. But the information that it was clear that it was not Planned Parenthood that called it in and protected that young girl. And so we see this time and again, but it's not just solely Planned Parenthood. This is systemic in the abortion movement, in the abortion industry.
I think what they would say in this situation, which is, well, that was just in Florida, or this is just in one region or one center in this area of the country. But in fact, the report that you put on my radar, The Health Consequences of Sex Trafficking, which was published by Loyola University, Chicago's Beasley Institute for Health Law and Policy, it highlighted, and this is shocking, that Planned Parenthood was the top most visited facility for trafficking victims, second only to hospital emergency rooms. Why is that, do you think?
You know, in another study that we published and wrote about at Live Action News that was published by the Journal of Human Trafficking, they found that, quote, among those who used community clinics in the surveys that they took of sex trafficked women, all but one visited a Planned Parenthood clinic because Planned Parenthood was, quote, familiar and helpful, unquote. And so in this report that you were speaking of, the person who wrote that report, Laura Lederer, I think is how she pronounces it, she's a senior advisor at the Trafficking in Persons for the U.S. Department of State, or was back in the day. And she interviewed these victims of sex trafficking victims, and I'm not saying they were all minors. Some of them might have been older, but they basically said that they were forced to abort their babies. Almost a third of human trafficking survivors visited a Planned Parenthood affiliate, and that she said she was taken there because, quote, unquote, or this was one of the reasons that one of the victims said, Planned Parenthood didn't ask any questions. They also received medical services from providers who knew they were being controlled by a pimp. And then one of those sex trafficked survivors, she was coerced into aborting 17 forced abortions. Then a national study funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention of the U.S. Department of Justice wrote this, quote, their study is described this way: a cross-sectional survey of female patients in 5 family planning clinics affiliated with Planned Parenthood in Northern California found that of the 9% of young women ages 16 to 29 who sought services at these family planning clinics, 16% reported pimp involvement. 16%. So this is not in any way an anomaly. Our investigative research was reviewed by an expert on human trafficking who wrote this. She said, quote, after viewing the Planned Parenthood video, my first thoughts were of the victims I have served over the last 8 years, specifically the women and girls, and their horrendous statements of rape, gang rapes, torture, branding, starvation, extortions, assault, and their reports of repeated forced abortions and miscarriages due to the trauma they received. I have often wondered where these multiple abortions took place, how medical professionals had not seen the extensive trauma to their bodies, spirits, and souls. If you're a lawmaker, don't close your eyes. If you're media, if you're a journalist, don't close your ears.
Carol, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all of this and opening our eyes to what's happening today in this country, across the country. We now know that this is not an anomaly, and we will continue to follow your research and others out there on forced, sex trafficked, and coerced abortions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
From Exposed, Abortion in America, this is Under Pressure, the Body of Evidence. Thanks for listening to the research findings from the experts today and the landscape of unwanted and sex-trafficked abortions in America. Join us through this entire series to hear more accounts of abortion coercion in depth. And join us for our next episode as we speak to Abby Johnson, a defected Planned Parenthood director turned pro-life advocate who sheds light on the tactics abortion centers take to pressure women into buying abortions. For Exposed, Abortions in America, this is Under Pressure.